So Charlie Kirk, I probably knew about him, started knowing about him just a couple years after he started Turning Point USA. I had to look it up. Turning Point USA, he founded in 2012 when he was 18 years old, which is really impressive, right? And I only became aware of him because I became more active in paying attention to politics around Donald Trump's first campaign, and Charlie Kirk was heavily involved in that. And so that's when I saw him. He was a couple years into Turning Point USA, a couple years into the Prove Me Wrong, going on campuses. Back at that time, just a, what I remember as like a card table, a couple people with him, holding cameras, and him talking to people, and him getting his hat knocked off and getting assaulted and verbally abused and all that kind of stuff. But I, and then to kind of watch as I was paying attention to politics and really wanting Donald Trump that first go around to get elected, being in law enforcement, it was that time, that time period, we needed him. And so on the edges of that, then I saw Charlie Kirk and his debates and that kind of stuff, and so he just started, being in my YouTube feed and that kind of thing, and to see that, I mean, what an amazing man, as far as to see this guy starting that when he was 18 years old. He was at the Republican National Convention, I believe, at like 21. Again, when Donald Trump was nominated for the 2016 election. And to just look back and see him and pay attention to the debates that I watched him do, and to realize that he was 21 years old at the time. And man, when this happened, of course, to see the incredible outpouring of support wasn't surprising, right? We all knew that there were a lot of people who supported him, and Turning Point USA, you could see it. Look at the videos from recently, how many thousands of people would show up to his events. And so that wasn't a surprise to see just the outpouring. But to the volume, I guess it was a little surprising for me, just the mass amount of support that he received. And then, of course, to see the vitriol from the left and the just flat out lies that people were willing to push. And I had never heard that about him before he was killed. I never heard anybody. I know that people, would throw out things like he was racist or he was transphobic, but I didn't think much of it, because you would watch a debate where he was debating a transgender person and how kind he was. And I just recently watched one where he was, talking with this person about he got that person's story, asked if they were willing to tell their story. And they were, as far as when they knew that something was different, that they thought they were the other gender. And then going into starting hormones and that kind of thing. And this person, I think, was maybe 21 at the time of the debate. And Charlie's response was, for you, I would hope, I would wish that you wouldn't have to wage war against your own body. And that was such a great example of who those of us who paid attention to him knew who he was. Knew he didn't, his religion, he was just steadfast in his religion as far as things like gay marriage. It just is a sin. That's in my faith. That's the way it is. It doesn't mean that gay people need to be treated differently or treated poorly. And in fact, there were many people, again, who came forward after he was killed and said, I'm gay. He treated me fantastic. He welcomed me. He welcomed me and said I belonged here. And same thing with the transgender people that I saw him debate. Was just, truly he was like, I wish you were happy in the body that you were born in. He used that term, I wished for you that you wouldn't have to wage war against your own body, pump it full of chemicals, go under the knife for this. I wished for you that you could figure out a way to love yourself in the body that you were born in. And that's absolutely how I feel. When we get into these debates and arguments about things like transgender, about men and women's sports, boys and girls sports, it becomes this, you're transphobic and trans rights and all of that. And then it's Title IX, and no, it's not transphobic. And trans, people have rights too, but this is a violation of Title IX and all that. But if you step back, it's like, I know that so many people who identify as trans are really just struggling. I don't know the numbers, but I've heard the numbers of things like children who start identifying as transgender, the high percentage of them who have been sexually assaulted as kids, who've been abused as kids, who have broken homes, substance abuse in the home, all of the things that just derail a childhood. And then things like autism, like on the spectrum of autism. And so the debate always gets thrown, in our faces that we're transphobic and or against trans rights. But I'm really concerned about these people who identify really young as transgender and are then pushed towards puberty blockers and surgery when they're really young. And you have to know that there's a financial benefit there. If you prescribe drugs, you make money. If you do surgery, you make money. If you have to then do aftercare therapy, you make money. If you do, pre-care therapy that helps them solidify that they identify as the other gender, you make money. And that's a problem. And then you have people who just aren't strong enough to just say, well, hold on, let's figure out what's actually going on here. Parents. The same type of parent who can't say no to their kids. And then you have the screaming brat in the checkout line. Or you have kids eating candy and drinking pop all day because their parents can't ever say no. For a number of reasons. IQ, honestly. Lower IQ people can't handle that. Broken homes, so one parent against the other, right? Divorce is a huge thing. You go to mom's house and you get all the treats, and you go to dad's house and you have to eat your proper veggies and that kind of stuff, or vice versa, of course. And so the playing of the parents, the children, playing that because they can, not knowing the consequences, and it shouldn't fall on them. The adults can't be adults, and they can't say no, and they can't say hold on. They can't say maybe it's in your head. It sucks to think that my kid has got something mentally going on that we have to work on, but I can't imagine it would be any different than my kid thinks that they're the other gender. That's got to be pretty shocking. But none of it is hatred toward the trans community or somebody who actually identifies as trans. Let's sort this out. Why don't we treat these kids with kid gloves and give them time and work with them and get them therapy and all that, knowing again that the number of people who identify as trans as adults is lower than the percentage who identify as trans as juveniles. Extrapolating from that data that people change their mind, and if you have gone through the use of puberty blockers, like truly, I didn't know a lot of this stuff, but obviously I knew that puberty blockers and any sort of chemical, any sort of medicine that would change things is not reversible, as was claimed. But, men who decide, well, they're not men, they're boys who decide to transition to girls and then decide that they don't want to do that anymore. If that's through puberty and you're on these drugs, then your testicles haven't developed, your penis hasn't developed. truly, it's kind of funny to joke about a micro penis. That's a funny term. But imagine having one because you went through this process, because as a kid you were confused and you were pushed puberty blockers, and then you wanted to reverse it, and it's irreversible, and so your genitals didn't develop, and so you have a non-functioning penis. That's pretty devastating. I mean, how can you condone that kind of stuff? And so that's the empathy that that this guy had talking to transgender specifically. Like, he said, I don't want you waging war. I wish you wouldn't have to wage war on your own body. Because it's never going to be good. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to turn out the way you want it. And that somehow has been twisted as he's transphobic. And he made comments about black people in the workplace, right? Blacks in the workplace, that because of DEI, it was in his head. And I guess it's in a lot of our heads, right? Like, well, and there was affirmative action before DEI, right? So like, and that does nobody any good. So a black person at a high prestigious university that has affirmative action, then are they here because of affirmative action? So are they here because they can't cut it, but because they're black, they've been given a boost? Or are they here because they belong? Because they can cut it and they're here. And that makes somebody like me sound racist, but can you imagine being a black student who can cut it, who is smart enough to be at, name the university, and people think that maybe he or she wouldn't have gotten in except for affirmative action, and now it's DEI. And so that was the one thing that I saw him talk about. He was talking about a black pilot. He said, now I see a black pilot and I think, well, are they a DEI hire or are they qualified? And in that, maybe said it many times, I saw one, and in that, then, these clips that have been going around, if it's by somebody who was against Charlie Kirk and wanted to smear him, then they would cut it off there. But he would say, and he did say, and I saw him say, and he said, I never would have thought that prior to DEI. That never would have crossed my mind. You're a pilot. I assume you went through all the training and all the bad pilots were weeded out, and here you are, and you're our pilot. Great. Whether you're black or white or Asian or whatever. But because of DEI, it puts it out there. Well, were you a DEI hire? And you have some very high, well-known people. I guess he mentioned Michelle Obama. Apparently she was an affirmative action hire or placement as a student. And so somehow that makes him racist. He's against DEI, as am I. again, he said, I never would have thought of that before DEI, but now it's there. Are you a DEI hire? The other big part of his death, besides seeing the left trying to smear him with these, types of clips that anybody who actually watched any of his videos knows are just cut up to smear him, and it's bad. I mean, those are bad. Those are bad people. Those are people with bad intentions, going against the man who was a great man. And then there's the people who openly celebrated his assassination and posted it online with, whatever terrible comment about, we got one Nazi, or, he talked about gun rights because he was a Second Amendment advocate. And so he was quoted, or I saw another debate conversation that he had where he said they must have been talking about a school shooting or a number of shootings around the time of this debate, and he said the Second Amendment is worth it. Like, we will have people killed by guns, that and that's terrible, but it's worth it. And why is it worth it? He said the Second Amendment is great for hunting, love hunting, but it's not the reason. The Second Amendment is definitely there for home defense. Absolutely, home defense is important, but that's not the reason. The reason is that you have a way to defend yourself. We, the people, have a way to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. And you say that now in 2025, and a lot of people think you're crazy. But they haven't paid any attention to things that have happened not that long ago. I mean, conservatives by the left are called Nazis all the time. Well, this type of thing happened in Nazi Germany. Take away your freedom of speech, take away your guns. And terrible things happen. And so he said it was worth it in the long run for the majority of the citizens of the United States to be able to protect themselves from a tyrannical government, to have people murdered by guns every year. That's the trade-off. Is that, yes, unfortunately, people will die, and unfortunately, for the last 50 years or so, we've had school shootings, and those are terrible. But the Second Amendment is for something bigger. It's for the masses, it's for all of the citizens of the United States. And that's why. And so people from the left chopped that up again and said, haha, he said it was worth it to have kids, killed in a school shooting, to have your guns, and so he got shot. And I mean, from that and from what I've watched, like, he still wouldn't argue against gun rights, against the Second Amendment. And because of that, because of these terrible posts, and so many that, you just get flooded. And I guess I've been on social media way more over the last couple of days than I usually am. But it's just flooded with people identifying other people who have cheered. TMZ got caught. A whole bunch of their people in the back room cheered when the announcement was made that Charlie Kirk actually died. And they tried to cover that up and said that they were watching some sort of car chase, which has been debunked. I mean, it's bullshit. I don't think the owner of TMZ or founder or whatever TMZ has actually admitted it yet, but I'm sure we'll get some sort of whistleblower at some point, or people will just stop watching because it's a disaster show anyway, right? I mean, and then you see that they're willing to do that. But then all these people, surgeons and teachers and coaches, come out of the woodwork and cheered. And it's shocking, but at the same time, it's really nice. You know, it's like flipping on the light, seeing all the cockroaches, because they were all out there. We just didn't know about them to this level at that point. And now they're identified, but they're on the left, right? And they thought that was okay. They thought they were going to get away with that. They probably thought they would post it and they would get likes and shares and all that kind of stuff. And now people left and right are losing their jobs. And that's a really good sign for, you know, the tides are turning. The tides have been turning for a while now. That's a really good sign. And so, but again, they thought it was like that was their knee-jerk reaction, was not only was to cheer about it, that they personally felt good that this was a good thing, but then they posted it publicly because they thought that was okay, that was going to be accepted. And that's that side, which is so troubling. That's the left. That's the left, and the same left that tried to smear and the shooter, whatever the heck his name is, and say that he was a Republican and he was a Trump supporter and MAGA and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, he was actually surrounded by Republicans, but he was radicalized. He was a radical leftist, and amongst people in his family who were all conservative. And again, it doesn't even matter, really. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what he was. Look at what the left's response to this was. The left's response to this was to cheer. And then, of course, to say that it was MAGA, and the Republicans said, no, he was left, and crazy left. But it doesn't matter. The left cheered his death. The left cheered his death and then justify. They do both. They cheer, and the ones who are smart enough to realize that we can't just openly outright cheer, then we justify, like, oh, he spread hatred and was bigoted and was transphobic and downplayed George Floyd and all that stuff. And the people who say that, like, unfortunately, a Minnesota representative, Ilhan Omar, she hasn't watched any of his videos, or she's watched them and decided to lie about it anyway. So she knows nothing about him. And everybody on the left either knows nothing about him or has in fact watched and chooses to lie anyway. And they chop these videos up to make it look good for their side. But then what is the reaction from the right? One of our own beloved, he was Jesus-like, right? I mean, he wasn't the second coming of Jesus. He never said anything like that. He always said, I'm a sinner with strong faith. I am a sinner too. But he lived his life so much according to his faith that what did the right do? What did all the people who knew who he was about and what he said and what he did, what did we do? Candlelight vigils, memorials, all over the place. Thousands of people everywhere memorializing him, posting on social media. People who are leaning left are saying, I'm leaving the Democratic Party. This is bullshit. That's what's happening. And it's great. I mean, good God, we had to lose him to see this. But, I mean, the way that he talked and the way that he lived his life, not only is he going to be rejoicing his death, because things only get better, but look at the response. Can you imagine building something from 18 to, your mid-20s and going to these events and having thousands of people show up, and debating you and cheering you and whatever, and knowing that you have a vast following. And then Donald Trump's second campaign, well, third campaign, obviously he lost in between, but third campaign and going for it. And he was instrumental in getting, and Donald Trump, President Trump says, Charlie Kirk was instrumental in getting the young voters, like speaking to them, getting through to them what the difference was between the Democrats and the Republicans, what conservatives believed versus the craziness that is going on the left right now. And so there's the video, if you've seen it, the video when he's live streaming his podcast or live streaming the election, and when he realizes and he knows that Donald Trump won, and all the work that he and his group put into, Turning Point USA and everybody put into that election, and he won. And to know that you helped with that, such a significant outcome in American history. All right, you're 30, 31 years old, and that happens. And then, he's inaugurated, and 9 months later, you're assassinated. And he goes up to, heaven, thinking, I did well, We always have work to do, but I did well. It's the movement is there and it's moving forward. And then to hear something like, I had to look up the numbers. So I looked it up. In 48 hours, in the 48 hours after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Turning Point USA received more than 32,000 inquiries for new chapters. 32,000. And then the outpouring of support online from people who, probably like me, who watched him, who loved watching him debate, who envied him a little bit. I have a fantastic life. I have a fantastic wife and kids. Absolutely. That's not where the envy lies. The little tinge of envy or jealousy lies in he knew. He knew where he was going. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was here for, here to do. He always seemed to know, right? I mean, I'm sure he had his bad days that aren't on these videos that we all see. But he was truly happy, right? I mean, he seemed to be truly happy. And somebody like me who's still constantly like, what more can I do in my career? Could I, change this or that? Or, how do I do whatever to still make the money that I do, but be home more with my kids and be at more of my kids' events and be able to take my kids, to more places and give them more experiences and that kind of stuff. And to get more out of my career, more joy, more satisfaction out of my career. And so I'm constantly kind of thinking about that. It's in the back, it's in the back of my head. It's not all day, every day just stewing about that, but like I'm always just, what else can I do? And as opposed to what I saw in Charlie Kirk, where he was just laser focused and then relaxed, because this is what I do. This is what I know I need to do. This is where we're going, and we're just doing it. So then to think about a man like him with the faith that he had and held so strongly, then to go up to heaven and be looking down and knowing that he made this amount of impact, which is a lot, that he knew about, right? But then there's, like I said, people like me who didn't comment, who didn't show up to Turning Point USA event. I'm not on their radar anywhere. Although I would have loved to, and I will now, even now, obviously I would have loved to see him debate, but someday I'll go. But then for him to be looking down and see that what he thought was his impact was here, what he knew about his impact being here, and to see that his impact was actually here and growing. And growing. And it was already here. He just probably didn't know it. And now the people who didn't even know him, who are like, as soon as I started watching this guy over the last couple of days, like, it's a great man. Turning Point USA is a great organization, and yes, this is something we should do. So 32,000 new chapters in 48 hours. Inquiries over that amount of time. That is insane. But it, again, just knowing what you know, knowing what we all know who paid attention and who care about the truth, which is what he did too, about who he really was. It's not surprising. I saw a memorial of a couple hundred people in some Asian country. I just knew it was an Asian country because of the writing in the background and stuff. And that's pretty cool. That's so cool. Yeah. I didn't get to watch Erica's entire speech. I read a lot of it that had been posted online, but but she's going to keep pushing forward, and we're all going to be there for it. And nobody's going to be able to replace him. But I think a bunch of people are going to step forward. It might not be, Charlie Kirk was the man, right? He was the man, the debater, the guy out front all the time. And now it may be multiple people, right? And he did panels and stuff like that too, but multiple people stepping forward. But I'm sure there's going to be so many that are so good. Yeah. Truly inspiring person. He just wanted to debate. He had ideas that some people didn't like. And a radical leftist decided that he needed to make a name for himself. And in that moment, everything changed. But man, for this movement, it's not stopping. It's moving forward. It is moving forward. Leaps and bounds is what I see. So Charlie Kirk, to you, man, you're an inspiration. And thank you.